Chapter 161. Garvey, a shiny? Fang Yuji's eyes widened the moment he saw Garvey. A rare Pokémon in her own right, Garvey was already a prize, but a shiny Garvey? That was the jackpot of jackpots. Yet Garvey didn't even glance his way. Instead, she padded straight over to Owen's side, fixed him with a steady, pleading look, and stood there waiting. In truth, Garvey herself felt a flicker of nerves. After traveling from town to town, meeting trainer after trainer, she'd picked up the one ambition that drove so many youngsters: the urge to set off on a grand journey, challenge every gym, and make a name for themselves. With more and more interleague tournaments cropping up these days, that dream had only grown more contagious. "Don't worry." Owen reached down, gently clasping Garvey's paw and giving it a reassuring squeeze. He smiled. "I'm not giving up the breeding center." He'd poured his heart and soul into building that facility. There was no way he'd abandon it just because Fang Yuji doubted him. And like Yuji himself had pointed out, if Owen ever did feel the itch to enter a tournament, it wouldn't take him long to pop in, give it his all, and be back home in no time. "Don't you see? The biggest tournament in Donghua, the Zongheng Conference, only lasts 3 days. Even with a chance to challenge the champion, it's just 4 days in total. In 4 days, if Dragonite can make it back in time, he could shuttle back and forth every day." Owen glanced over at Shinaiduo and saw relief wash over the Gardevoir's face. But she wasn't about to let Fang Yuji's words lull her into complacency. With a soft rustle of her gown-like feathers, she slid off Owen's lap and planted herself at his side. Her eyes glowed a deep, ominous red as she fixed Fang Yuji in an unblinking stare. Fang Yuji stiffened under that gaze and felt a sudden, crushing weight on his chest. He swallowed hard. The confident awe he'd just felt toward Shinaiduo evaporated in an instant, replaced by a jittery fear. He tried to call out to his own psychic Pokémon, Lipstick, but when he turned, he saw it cowering behind the sofa, trembling uncontrollably, far more spooked than he was. Only his Flareon stood its ground, ears pricked and eyes darting warily at Shinaiduo. The rest of his team huddled in silence, too intimidated to even peek over the couch. What was happening? After all they'd been through together, his Pokémon were supposed to be seasoned travelers, unshaken by anything. Yet here they were, reduced to quaking novices. Fang Yuji's heart pounded as he tried to steady himself. Clearly this Gardevoir meant business, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face her. Owen's heart pounded as he met Gardevoir's gaze, an intensity he'd never experienced, not even when facing the legendary trainer Red. Born and raised in the wild and infused with Darkray's nightmare energy, Gardevoir possessed a raw, unsettling malice in her eyes that could unnerve any opponent, be it human or Pokémon. Okay, his childhood friend Fang Yushi said, stepping forward with a wry grin. "I get it. Being a trainer isn't the only path, and breeding isn't the only future. Just focus on the Zongheng Conference coming up. Aim for a top ranking, and everything else will follow." He gave Owen's shoulder a firm, encouraging pat. Owen nodded, appreciating the gesture. He and Fang had dreamed together as kids. Owen once swore he'd ride on Arceus's back one day, but childhood promises rarely survive the test of time. Now, with Gardevoir by his side and that fierce stare still lingering in his mind, Owen knew his journey had taken a different turn. This challenge was his alone to face. Owen watched Fang Yuji ride off into the distance, then let out a relieved sigh and turned back to find Gardevoir quietly following him. The elegant Pokémon stood watching Yuji's retreating figure, but the moment it caught Owen's gaze, it turned toward him. The pale blue folds of its dress-like gown fluttered in the breeze, and its ruby-red eyes held a gentle concern that Owen hadn't seen before. "I've never seen you look at me like that," Owen admitted, surprised by the tenderness in her expression. Shinai didn't hesitate. In a soft, unguarded voice, she replied, "Because I'm worried you'll be convinced by him and run off on one of his wild adventures." She paused, then, noticing Owen still silent, nudged him gently and asked, "Did that look scare you?" He shook his head, then offered a small, rueful smile. "No, it's just, I didn't realize how much you cared." Shinai's lips curved into an understanding smile, and she fell into step at Owen's side. Together, they left the path where Fang Yuji had disappeared, the quiet afternoon settling around them as they headed back to the daycare. side by side, but somehow a little closer than before. It's nothing like that. Don't worry, I'm not leaving the breeding house, and I'm not concerned about them either, Owen said with a relaxed stretch and a grin. I'll head to the kitchen in a bit. First, let's go check on Sister Shauna. September 27th arrived in the blink of an eye. 3 days had already passed. The first 2 days were surprisingly quiet. Fang Yuji hadn't brought Eevee by, and both Mewtwo and Dragonite were still out on their journey. This morning, however, Grandpa Han appeared with some long-awaited news. The road into town was finally getting repaired. I've arranged everything with the Alliance's maintenance crew, Grandpa Han announced. Even better, a benefactor has stepped forward to cover most of the cost. Our town only needs to raise a 1 million yuan deposit, and if residents volunteer labor, that amount can be reduced further. Owen ran the numbers in his head. 1 million was merely 10% of his personal assets, an amount he could easily spare. Besides, most villagers were elderly, with few of working age left to help. He decided then and there he would cover the deposit himself and spare the townspeople any financial strain. The mayor could barely contain his excitement. Tonight, I'm going door to door to tally everyone's contributions, he announced. If you have money, please donate. If you have strength, lend us a hand. And even a simple meal from those less fortunate will help. Once the surveyors finish, we'll break ground immediately. That very morning, the road construction crew had arrived to inspect the route. To their surprise, the existing foundation was solid. It only needed widening and a top layer of shock-absorbing asphalt. Even better, they promised, traffic wouldn't be interrupted during work, and the upgraded road would open in barely half a month. Owen whistled in amazement. That's incredibly fast, he said, truly Donghua speed. Meanwhile, in the plantation, Ai Guanxi's sister knelt beside a bed of fading blooms. As the first flowers began to wither, she gently loosened the soil, pulled away spent petals, and planted fresh seeds, ensuring the garden never ran out of color. Owen watched her for a moment, appreciating how even the smallest nurturing act could guarantee the garden's endless renewal. Owen watched in awe as Ai Guanxi, who'd only been here a few days, effortlessly identified every single flower in the garden. Having these two little helpers living in his cultivation quarters saved him so much time and effort. Without them, he'd be juggling garden work, household chores, and countless other tasks all by himself. All done, trainer? Ai Guanxi announced brightly, stepping back to admire the freshly planted beds. Her sister couldn't help but grin with pride. Fantastic job! You'll have it down pat in no time. Owen seized the moment to join in the praise, reaching out to ruffle Ai Guanxi's hair. The girl's cheeks flushed pink, and she lowered her head shyly. In the few days they'd spent together, Ai Guanxi had already noticed how much the trainer appreciated both her and her brother's help. Though her father had told her that tending to the garden was simply their duty, and that praise was purely a bonus, she couldn't deny how happy Owen's kind words made her feel. Chapter 162. Owen was kneeling among the flower beds when the monarch snake glided in, its iridescent scales rippling in the morning light. It paused at the edge of the blooms and lifted its head, emitting a soft, inquisitive shoo-shoo. Owen's eyes lit up. He'd planted these flowers simply to feed his 3 honeybees, never giving much thought to anything beyond basic nectar production. But now he remembered what the monarch snake's greengrass field could do, imbue plants with extra vitality, and even trigger mutations. If one of these flowers changed, its nectar might take on entirely new properties. Yes, please, Owen said at once. If you can, extend your greengrass field to cover all these blossoms. Shoo-shoo, the snake answered. It coiled gracefully and released a wave of emerald energy. Instantly, a shimmering field of green light spread through the garden, soaking into every stem, leaf, and petal. Under that life-giving aura, the flowers seemed to lean toward the sun, their colors deepening and petals unfurling with renewed vigor. The 3 bees, already busy flitting from bloom to bloom, buzzed with delight as they collected nectar richer and sweeter than before. Nearby, the seeds Ai Guanxi had sown only hours earlier pushed through the soil, tiny shoots bursting into life. Owen moved between the rows, carefully inspecting each blossom for anything unusual. After just a few moments, a pale purple lily caught his eye. its petals tinged with a delicate violet glow rather than the usual pristine white. Owen knelt beside it, heart pounding. Here was the first true mutation, exactly what he'd hoped to see. He glanced up at the monarch snake, who met his gaze with a knowing shimmer in its eyes. Owen's excitement swelled. With this one mutated flower, his garden had crossed into a whole new realm of possibility. At this time of year, most lilies are wilting, and those beside them are already drooping. Yet one bloom remained startlingly fresh, larger than the rest, and radiating a soothing, lingering fragrance. Owen's heart skipped a beat. This had to be a mutation spawned by the nearby green grass field. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and activated his exploration eye. Right before his eyes, a translucent overlay appeared. Fresh lily, mutated lily with a fragrance that attracts flower-type Pokémon. Under proper temperatures, it will retain its bloom all year round. Flower-type Pokémon, Owen murmured, brow furrowing in thought. So many possibilities flashed through his mind. The exotic displays in Huabebe's flower shop, longtime allies like Venusaur or Vileplume, and even rarities such as Orchid or Mirabilis. But he shook his head. Attracting Pokémon didn't guarantee they'd all be flower types. Smiling at his overzealous imagination, he stowed the device and continued his survey of the garden, flanked by his sister, Ayakashi, and their companion, Serpent. Owen finished inspecting the garden and, finding no other strange flowers, turned toward the kitchen to prepare his Pokémon's meal. As he passed through the greenhouse onto the open plantation, a sharp whistle split the air. He looked up. What could be streaking across the sky that fast, if not Dragonite or Mewtwo? Before he could decide, Dragonite plunged down in a joyous arc. In an instant, the great dragon wrapped its arms around him and lifted him high above the fields. Owen's eyes widened in surprise as Dragonite looped through the air, clearly celebrating its freedom. Here, in the breeding facility, even Mewtwo seemed to defer to Owen's authority, so Dragonite no longer had to answer to its old master. "Owen!" came Dragonite's delighted roar in his mind. "Whoa! Easy there!" Owen laughed, holding on as the wind rushed past. "Put me down, please." With a happy rumble, Dragonite spiraled gently to the ground and set him down on a soft patch of grass. Owen stepped away, brushing blades of clover from his trousers. At that moment, Mewtwo descended in a silent swirl of psychic energy and alighted nearby. Mewtwo's gaze softened as it took in Drago, Knight's exuberant display, and Owen felt all tension drain from his shoulders. Whether it was the sight of his happy Dragonite or simply the peaceful air of this quiet town, he breathed in deeply, ready to face whatever came next. Owen stepped off the carriage and took a deep breath. The moment he set foot in this town, a wave of calm washed over him, as if the place itself had a quiet kind of magic. A sudden gust of wind tousled his clothes, and he winced as his collar twisted awkwardly. "Next time, Dragonite," he muttered, smoothing the fabric, "prepare me something sturdier." Dragonite hovered at his side, eyes brimming with amusement. "Sorry, boss," he rumbled. "I just got too excited to see you." Owen rolled his eyes, but couldn't suppress a small smile. He glanced over at Mewtwo, who stood a few paces away, arms folded and gaze distant. Curiosity got the better of him. "So," Owen asked, "how's the counterattack shaping up? Has the new recruit finished their tests?" Mewtwo's expression flickered, part frustration, part something else Owen couldn't quite place. "It's almost ready," he replied after a moment. "But with that human's involvement, our original plan has to change." Owen resisted the urge to press for every detail. Instead, he tilted his head. "Can I go back to town now? From what I hear, things turned out all right in the last trial. The game test is over. What's our next move?" Dragonite nudged Owen with a playful grin. Mewtwo's lips curved into a hint of a smirk. With friends like these by his side, Owen felt anything but worried. No matter what surprises lay ahead, he knew they'd face them together and come out on top. Owen's mind raced with possibilities. Was Mewtwo planning to retreat, taking its cloned Pokémon somewhere far from human civilization, just as it had once done? Or would it wander the world instead? And did it even copy Xiaoji's Pokémon in this game? Mewtwo went silent, its expression clouded with uncertainty. After a long moment, it shook its head. "I don't know. I'm more confused about my own purpose now, my very existence." Here was a creature born of human hands, yet free of any lingering resentment toward people or Pokémon. And now it felt utterly adrift, unsure of what it could or should do. Owen's eyes lit up, a reassuring smile spreading across his face. "Then come with me," he said warmly. "You've got nothing but time on your hands. I'll find you something meaningful to do, something that'll keep you busy, so you're not sitting around worrying yourself into despair." Chapter 163. With you? Mewtwo's voice trembled with surprise. He swept his gaze across the plantation. Where once he'd seen rows of workers laboring under the hot sun, now Gardevoir and Sylveon moved gracefully between the trees, picking fruit. Milotic and Cielio handled the watering in the greenhouse, and Monarch tended to the young saplings. The entire estate buzzed smoothly, as if it had grown legs and walked itself. Mewtwo shook his head in wonder. "I thought you already had enough help here." Owen raised an eyebrow, amused by Mewtwo's tone. He strolled over and gave the psychic Pokémon a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Who said we're short-handed? There's always something to do." He glanced back at the neatly trimmed hedges and the network of stone paths winding through the groves. "Besides, you don't seem terribly busy these days, do you?" Mewtwo tilted his head. Owen leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You could help me repair the roads, keep an eye on any challengers who show up, and then, someday soon, I want to hold an official psychic-type tournament. You'd be the final boss. No one could beat you." He grinned. "After all, the thing you can't have always seems the most tempting." Owen watched Mewtwo hesitate for a moment, then quietly agreed. "All right, I'll do it." "Good," Owen said with a nod. "Now, why don't you take a seat, Gardevoir, Ibutu, and I will head into the kitchen and whip up something for everyone. Oh, and later, tell me how the game's been going. I'm dying to know what you've been up to." Mewtwo gave a silent, almost awkward nod in response. An hour later, Owen carried steaming bowls and plates to the dining table, carefully arranging each Pokémon's meal. He placed a dish in front of Mewtwo, then paused, a question suddenly popping into his mind. "By the way," he said, "have you seen Menghuan around lately? It's been following you everywhere." Mewtwo's expression froze. It remembered Menghuan's anxious glances over the past few days. Perhaps Menghuan had misunderstood Owen's moods and thought there was tension, so it asked Mewtwo to escort it to the breeding center for reassurance. Owen waited, curious to see how Mewtwo would respond. Owen frowned as he remembered their last failed meeting. In fact, Menghuan had flown all the way up above the breeding house, yet when the moment came to approach him, it froze with fear and hid in the distance. And now, Chao Meng was nowhere to be found. He'd even sent word for it to speak with him directly. So strange for such a powerful creature to be so timid. But apparently, Menghuan believed it had somehow offended Owen and was too frightened to show its face. Owen sighed. "You really think I'm angry at it?" He asked the messenger warily. "It said you two had a conflict," came the reply. "It's afraid to come near." "Afraid?" Owen blinked at the statement. Then he shook his head and let a gentle smile break free. "If you see it again, tell Menghuan that I'm not angry at all. I just want to talk." Their conversation carried on openly in the crisp air, unaware of a pair of curious eyes watching from a nearby pine. Perched high on a branch, a small bird with mottled gray wings cocked its head at Owen's words. Gathering its courage, it leapt from the branch and fluttered down, landing softly on the table before him. The bird's feathers trembled as it tilted its head and stared shyly at Owen. Owen's lips curved in amusement. "You're still just as timid, huh?" At his words, the creature's form shimmered. In an instant, the little bird vanished, replaced by a delicate, dreamlike kitten. It padded silently to Owen's side, its tail flicking with cautious curiosity, and let out the softest mew. Then, with bright eyes fixed on him, it glanced away as if mustering the bravery to speak. Owen's grin was unmistakably playful, and at last the dreamy kitten relaxed its guard and fluttered closer. "Funny," Owen murmured. "You've met plenty of people, so why are you nervous around me?" He set 2 oversized buns on the table, drizzled them with savory meat sauce, then sprinkled a pinch of dried catnip over the top. "Go on, help yourself." "Meow?" The kitten's ears perked up. Its tail curled anxiously for a moment, then it hopped onto the edge of the table. Eyes bright with curiosity, it seized a bun and began munching away, pausing only to dip each bite in the sauce. It had never tasted anything quite like this, but it had seen Owen and Pibby Bird eat the same way before, so the idea didn't feel entirely foreign, just delightfully new. A melodic chime rang in Owen's ears. System notice. Congratulations, Dreamy Kitten's affection has risen from 5 to 50. Rewards granted. 3 supergrade magical candies, 5 packs of supergrade gin kala, and 1 world tree leaf. SSS grade ingredient, ideal for brewing tea. Owen's chest swelled with satisfaction. Ha! No more scaring off Dreamy Kitten. From now on, he'd treat this little companion with nothing but kindness. I still can't believe you were created using its DNA. Dr. Chow Meng, standing beside Owen, couldn't hide his inward sigh. The Pokémon before them was usually so fierce, so why was it suddenly so compliant around Owen? Owen leaned closer, eyes fixed on the small creature. It was his first chance to see a Mew in person, and he was struck by how its fur, so short and fine, lay like a silken coat against its body. A long, tapering tail swept behind it, completing its sleek, almost aerodynamic form. He'd always assumed from the anime that Mew was hairless, but reality, he realized, had its own surprises. Catching Owen's gaze, Mew turned and offered a shy, almost embarrassed smile before patting over gently. Mew? Owen couldn't help laughing softly as he reached out to stroke its velvety coat. Who would ever believe that he'd captured the Pokémon every trainer dreamed of, simply by dipping a steamed bun in sauce? Mew didn't know what Owen was laughing about, but the infectious cheer lifted his spirits, so he simply bit into the steamed bun without a second thought. Once Owen's chuckles finally subsided, he set his hand down, poured a small cup of rice wine, and handed it to Mewtwo. All right, he said, tell me, what were you doing in the Kanto region? Mewtwo stared at the cup for a long moment, then shook his head. I don't know how to put it into words. Owen gave him a reassuring smile. That's okay. I'll just read your memories myself. He reached out and placed a hand on Mewtwo's shoulder. In an instant, Owen's vision filled with a whirlwind of images, secret laboratories, shadowy figures, desperate battles, and distant Pokémon cries. Memories tumbled through his mind so swiftly that his expression twisted into something between awe and horror as Kanto's hidden past revealed itself. Chapter 164. I never would have guessed. You actually forced Pikachu into its second form. Owen stared in disbelief. Xiaoji had just been killed right before Pikachu. Surely that little mouse would be furious. You mean Pikachu? That Pikachu? Mewtwo's eyes widened. Do you know Pikachu? Is he some kind of legendary beast? Owen shook his head with a wry smile. Legendary? I couldn't say. But I do know him, and I know his trainer too. They're both rather extraordinary. He laughed softly. Funny thing is, I know them, but they've never heard of me. Mewtwo tilted its head in confusion. You know them, but they don't know you? It sounded absurd, especially coming from someone so calm after witnessing Pikachu unleash a devastating thunderbolt and its trainer outright shattering a Pokemon's superpowers. Owen's grin grew wider. Still not convinced? Put a superpower barrier around me. Let's see how well it holds up. Recognition flickered across Mewtwo's face, its earlier suspicions confirmed. With a snap of its fingers, it summoned an invisible veil of psychic energy that wrapped around Owen from head to toe. This barrier is invisible. It doesn't squeeze me. It simply holds me in place. At first, Owen tried to blast his way out with his psychic powers. He could feel the field resisting him, but no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't break it. Even so, he refused to give up. His own synergy was only at an upper intermediate level. Mewtwo's power, by contrast, well, since overcoming that last mental block, had surged into realms beyond description. The difference between them wasn't just night and day, it was a pond versus the ocean. Knowing he had no hope of tearing the prison apart with mind alone, Owen switched tactics and called on brute strength. He wasn't sure exactly how powerful his body had become, but the system's super newbie status meant he could draw on the physical gifts of every Pokémon he'd ever bonded with. Monarch's resilience, Melodic's grace, Dragonite's raw muscle, even a fraction of Mewtwo's legendary power now flowed through him. Channeling it all, he braced his feet, clenched his fists, and pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air with a low hum, as if the barrier itself strained against his onslaught. Owen kept at it, every fiber of his being screaming to break free. Whether sheer psychic force or unwavering physical might, he refused to be caged. And deep down he knew, one way or another, this invisible prison was going to give. Owen had grown so close to his level 70 Dragonite during their training that he could literally feel his own power growing every day, and he'd learned to wield it instinctively. Yet now, when Mewtwo laid a casual psychic trap on him, all that strength barely flexed the ethereal bonds. Mewtwo's eyes darkened, and the psychic restraints snapped tighter. Of course, he'd recognized Owen as a fellow psychic-augmented human. Against an ordinary person, these chains would have snapped bones. Ensnared by Mewtwo's overpowering mind force, Owen exhaled slowly. His super rookie trait kept him unharmed, but it offered no defense against confinement. He wasn't invulnerable, he was just exceptionally durable. Few Pokémon could bind him, and none except Mewtwo posed this level of threat. Still, Owen's mind buzzed with one question. Xiaoji had once torn apart Mewtwo's psychic binds without breaking a sweat. By rights, Owen should do the same. Was he using the wrong approach, or was there something else at work here? Owen stared at Xiaoji's face in the photograph, her eyes wide with terror as Pikachu teetered on the brink of death. Could he reach into that moment and feel her fear? His own Pokémon were safe in this moment, but thanks to the power of Evergreen, he could absorb another's emotions and project them into his own mind. It wasn't difficult, especially now with Mewtwo's psychic transmission still fresh in him. Without hesitation, Owen closed his eyes and conjured the scene. He pictured himself bound and helpless while Mewtwo hovered above. Beside it, Tyranitar's massive form loomed, claw raised to summon a devastating earthquake that shook the battlefield. In the same instant, Tyranitar prepared an amplified destruction ray, so potent that no ordinary Pokémon could withstand its blast. As the vision took hold, Owen's blood pounded in his ears. He felt Superior's agony as the ground split beneath its feet and the destructive beam crackled in the sky. His heart raced with the intensity of the moment. Every tremor, every surge of power, every flicker of fear flooding him like wildfire. Owen didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he thrust his hands into the shimmering psychic barrier that surrounded Mewtwo, as if plunging his flesh against an unbreakable wall. Instead of recoiling, he tore at it with startling force. In barely a second, the barrier shattered like thin ice. An unfamiliar rage flared in Owen's chest. Before he fully registered what he'd done, he balled his hand into a fist and drove it straight into Mewtwo's face. The punch cut through the air like a gale. At the last moment, Owen's head whipped back, and he staggered, reality crashing back in. "Ugh!" he gasped, blood trickling at his lip. Mewtwo froze. With Owen's fist still hovering inches from its snout, it swallowed hard. If it hadn't ducked in time, that blow would have seriously injured it. No trainer before had ever ripped through its psychic defenses so quickly. The previous challenger needed precious seconds to crack even a sliver of that barrier, yet Owen had torn it apart in the blink of an eye and counterattacked before it could react. Mewtwo's crimson eyes narrowed in shock. Owen blinked and shook himself out of the vivid scene playing in his mind. He drew in a steadying breath and forced a wry smile. "Sorry, I got carried away with a little experiment," he admitted, doing his best to hide the odd urge to punch Mewtwo. The whole point of this trial was to strengthen the bond between trainer and Pokémon by briefly separating them, but who could really stand being apart from their partner? Thank goodness it was only a simulation. Otherwise, Owen might have taken flight just to square off with that psychic powerhouse. Mewtwo stood perfectly still, offering no reply. Watching Pikachu and its trainer reaffirm their bond must have given the clone pause. After 2 months of traveling together, Mewtwo knew it wasn't invincible. Yet seeing Owen tear through its psychic barrier, feeling each strike land, whether it was the first blow or the second, was nothing short of astounding. Owen exhaled slowly, then cast a quick look at the monarch at his side. It was unharmed, and that sight eased the tension in his shoulders. He turned back to Mewtwo and asked, "All right, where's the Tyrannosaurus?" Chapter 165. "It's still here," Mewtwo said, holding up the Pokeball that contained Tyranitar. Owen frowned. "You rescued this after escaping Team Rocket?" Mewtwo nodded gravely. "When I broke free, I freed a circle of Pokémon that Team Rocket had been torturing. In the chaos, most of them scattered in every direction. I released some as we traveled, but a few were so warped by their suffering that their natures turned violent. This Tyranitar is the worst of the lot." Owen pressed his palm to his forehead. If a Pokémon of Tyranitar's strength ever ran wild among humans, it could level entire towns before any trainer caught it. Then the authorities would seize it, evaluate its temperament, and decide whether to try re-education or simply destroy it. The silver lining was that this one hadn't harmed anyone yet, so there was still time to save it. "How many more like this?" he asked. "The most vicious is this Tyranitar," Mewtwo replied. "But there are others, a smelly dragon, and that Dragonite over there." He pointed toward a massive Dragonite perched on a rocky ledge, its amber eyes cold and watchful. Owen took a steadying breath. "All right, let's find them before anyone gets hurt, and see if we can bring them back from the brink." Owen tilted his head as he studied the small creature curled up beside Mewtwo. "Slimy Melu?" Mewtwo frowned, glancing down at the Pokeball-sized gooey Pokémon. "Yes, it's odd." "Odd?" Owen echoed. Mewtwo bit his lip. "I rescued it not long ago. Ever since then, it's been unnaturally clingy toward me." "Clingy?" Owen raised an eyebrow. "Really? At first glance, this Dragonite doesn't look like it would follow you everywhere." Mewtwo sighed softly. "I planned to release it somewhere in Kalos where it could thrive, but when I opened the ball, it panicked, burst into tears, and ran straight into the nearest town. I felt responsible for its fear, so I brought it back. Now, no matter which city we visit, it insists on staying by my side." Owen nodded slowly. "So right now, the only ones traveling with you are those 3 dragon-type Pokémon." He fell silent, his brow furrowing in thought. Dragon-type Pokémon. Owen winced as he surveyed the aftermath of the feast. 3. How many of these energy cubes do they eat in a single day? His temples throbbed. Tomorrow he'd have to start batch-making those full-stomach cubes if he wanted to keep up. But there was nothing for it now. Time to eat, and then deal with these 2 ravenous beasts. An hour later, even the fastest eaters, like his Brachydios, were slowing down on their afternoon ration of energy cubes. But as Owen reached for another cube, he noticed Drumstick, his oversized poultry Pokémon, eyeing him hungrily. All right, no more, Drumstick," he called. Drumstick gave a contented cluck, wiped the crumbs from his beak, and bounded off toward the plantation. Clearly, a massive lunch hadn't spoiled his appetite for a second helping. Owen shook his head, pulled out the last of his own cubes, and settled in next to Mewtwo. The 2 shared a quiet meal as the sun dipped low. 30 minutes later, Owen pocketed the empty wrappers and led Mewtwo down to the riverside clearing. Behind them, Dream sauntered along in his true form, no longer disguised as that little peepee bird. But when Owen glanced back, Dream was gone. One moment he was there, strolling beside them. The next, he'd vanished without a trace. Owen's heart skipped a beat. "Dream?" he called into the gathering dusk, but only the soft rush of the river answered. Owen didn't give it much thought. Down by the riverbank, he spotted Pidgeot hard at work, perfecting its aerial maneuvers. Ever since they'd driven Toucanon out of its territory, Pidgeot had barely shown any interest in training, so seeing it push itself like this was unusual. Owen wondered if Mewtwo and Darkrai had somehow provoked it when he'd called it down earlier. He shook his head. Pidgeot was a fully grown Pokémon, and putting in extra effort to get stronger was a good thing. As long as it didn't overdo it, there was no harm in letting it continue. Instead, Owen turned to Mewtwo. "Let's see Gudra next," he said. Mewtwo gave a slight nod, produced a Pokeball, and tapped it gently. In an instant, a Pokémon over a meter tall materialized at Owen's feet. Its lavender body glistened with a thin film of sticky mucus along its hands and chin, though none of it dripped away. 2 stubby arms poked out from its sides, while 2 long, drooping tentacles jutted from the top of its head. A round, jade-green patch colored the tip of its tail, and its large, emerald eyes sparkled with curiosity. Owen studied it for a moment before smiling. "Gudra," he said, naming it at last. The Goo Dragon blinked, glanced around at its surroundings, and then promptly recognized Mewtwo standing beside Owen. With a soft squelch, it waddled forward, tail swishing, ready for whatever came next. Owen watched as the little creature's eyes sparkled with trust. It even took 2 hesitant steps forward, its sticky scales glimmering in the light. If Mewtwo hadn't calmly extended a hand to halt it, Owen was certain the clingy Melu dragon would have bounded straight onto him. "That's enough," Mewtwo said softly, but firmly. Owen couldn't help a mental groan. So clingy. Yet as he studied the dragon more closely, he realized something else was off. It looked noticeably smaller than an average smelly dragon, barely 2 meters long, perhaps even less. In fact, it was a bit tinier than a newly evolved member of its kind. And despite its diminutive size, the powerful aura rolling off its scales left no doubt that this dragon was far from ordinary. Owen tapped the wrist console, bringing up the creature's full profile. Name, Smelly Dragon. Gender, female, diet, herbivorous. Rarity, gold. Tier individual values, IVs, HP 31, Attack 18, Special Attack 30, Defense 31, Special Defense 31, Speed 14. Level 59 skills, Tears in the Eyes, Acid Bomb, Dragon Breath, Absorb, Hold On, Water Wave, Pray for Rain, Wide Area Destruction, Act Like a Baby, Meteor Swarm, Dragon Voice, Dragon Wave, Earthquake, Water Cannon, Destruction Ray. Introduction. A Pokémon forcibly evolved by massive doses of concentrated energy serum. Each time it uses a skill, it endures excruciating pain from that energy. Intimacy, 0, it doesn't recognize you yet. Pleasure Index, 30, content. Owen exhaled slowly. Level 59, just 1 level shy of ascending to king rank. On paper, this smelly dragon was formidable, but the data only told part of the story. Despite its evolution, the creature was barely a year old, probably less. In other words, still a baby. No wonder it clung so desperately to Mewtwo. As a hatchling, it had been captured and pumped full of that agonizing energy serum, forced to grow up far too fast, far too soon. Now, every time it unleashed one of its devastating skills, it relived that torment. Owen's heart tightened. Somewhere beneath the scales and power, this little dragon was still trembling with the fear of a child longing for a savior, and he had a feeling it had just found one. Sure, please go ahead and paste the full chapter text you'd like me to revise. Once I have the original machine-translated content, I can smooth out the prose, ensure Owen is consistently portrayed as male, and deliver a polished, coherent English version. Chapter 166. Owen nodded twice, a wave of sadness washing over him as he looked down at the Pokémon before him. He thought of all the creatures Team Rocket had snatched away, especially those taken as hatchlings, robbed of any normal childhood. This Mewdrag bore the scars of that cruelty. Under ordinary circumstances, wild dragon-type Pokémon often take over a decade to reach their final form. Yet this one had been forced, through unnatural experimentation, to evolve from its first stage to its last in a matter of months. No wonder its body was so fragile. He exhaled slowly. Despite its gaunt frame, the Mewdragon managed a hopeful chirp. It even tried to speak, its voice a little too high-pitched for its size. I'm still young, it murmured. Mewtwo twitched its lips, as if amused by the creature's bravado. Then, from the Mewdragon's belly came 2 plaintive gurgles. It blinked up at Mewtwo with wide, pleading eyes. Owen hesitated, then looked at Mewtwo in surprise. Have you brought its usual meal? Mewtwo simply inclined its head. The answer needed no words. Owen froze at the soft hiss, his eyes widening as he looked at Mewtwo in disbelief. He'd never guessed that Mewtwo cared for its Pokémon so personally. All this time, Owen had assumed that fully grown partners, creatures like Dragonite, ventured off on their own to hunt or forage. They were more than capable of feeding themselves. Yet, here was this tiny, smelly dragon, still so dependent that Mewtwo had to go out and fetch its meals. Owen's mind filled with a tender image, Mewtwo trudging through the wilderness, gathering food with great effort, then returning home like a proud parent bringing back dinner for its child. It was a strange, almost touching sight. I have to hand it to you, Owen said softly. I didn't expect you to be such a devoted caretaker. Mewtwo's cheeks flushed faintly at the praise. It shifted uncomfortably and stammered. Why won't you stop talking about it? That little one, it's so attached to me. If I'm out of sight, it'll start crying. Owen chuckled. That's fine. It sees you as a father figure, someone strong who can protect it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll let Sister Aiguanchi look after it for now, Owen said with a smile. Sister Aiguanchi had a knack for caring for dolls, though admittedly, this one was on the large side. Meanwhile, the sticky Melu dragon's stomach rumbled audibly. Its gooey gaze stayed locked on Mewtwo, and almost involuntarily, it reached out a slimy claw toward the psychic Pokémon. Mewtwo's expression immediately turned sour. Owen didn't hesitate. He slipped his hand into the storage orb at his belt and pulled out a fully satiated energy cube. Holding it out, he said softly, "Here, this is for you." The Melu Dragon's lips twitched at the sight of the cube, but it stayed rooted to the spot, eyes flicking distrustfully between Owen and the offered treat. It remembered all too well the last time someone had given it an energy cube like this one, how their injections had left its body burning, swollen, and racked with pain whenever it tried to use its abilities. Only when Mewtwo stepped forward and gave the dragon a reassuring nod did the creature's tense posture soften. Owen waited a heartbeat, then passed another cube to Mewtwo, who ate it without hesitation. Turning back to the dragon, Owen offered a warm, encouraging smile. "See, nothing bad happened." Owen watched as Mewtwo knelt calmly before the nervous little dragon. "It's all right," Mewtwo said softly. The dragon's anxious eyes flicked between Owen and Mewtwo, but when the Pokémon repeated, "Go ahead, there's no harm in it," the creature carefully padded over to Owen. It picked up a single energy cube, sniffed it, and bit down. Its eyes brightened with surprise, but still it hesitated to try a second cube. After several tense heartbeats passed uneventfully, the dragon's relief finally won out. It snatched the rest of the bag and began gobbling them down with evident delight. Owen let out a tired sigh. Watching the tiny dragon scarf down treats so eagerly should have cheered him up, but somehow it only made him feel more worn out. Mewtwo nudged him. "Dragonite will be far more temperamental." Owen closed his eyes. He remembered all too well Dragonite's explosive fury the last time they'd seen one. Still, he nodded, steeling himself. "Go on, release it. Just keep it under control." Mewtwo drew Dragonite's Pokeball from his belt, tapped it lightly, and held his breath. In an instant, the air shimmered, and the great orange-blue form of Dragonite appeared before them, its amber eyes blazing with curiosity, and something not altogether friendly. Owen stepped into the clearing and froze. A massive shape emerged from the shadows. At first it looked dazed, but the moment it spotted him, its eyes bloodshot, its jaw dropped, and it fixed him with a furious glare. Then it hesitated. A thin veil of Owen's aura rippled around the beast, and whatever plan it had in mind died on its tongue. Owen let out a soft sigh and studied the creature before him, a grinning Dragonite. This was no ordinary Dragonite. Scanning its data in his mind, Owen noted, gender, male, temperament, overconfident, qualification, red, individual values, HP 28, attack 29, special attack 28, defense 20, special defense 14, speed 27. Approximate level, 75 to 76. Skill set, Feather Roost, Dragon Breath, Dragon Tail, Wing Attack, Hyper Beam, Flamethrower, Self-Destruct, Earthquake. Condition, chronically undernourished, its overall strength has waned. Intimacy, 50, an exceptionally deep-seated hatred for humans. Happiness, 40. Owen's brows rose. He'd never encountered a Pokémon with intimacy so low, not even the first Mewtwo he'd faced, which had lingered at only 20, or the Squirtle that had befriended him at the outset of his journey. Calmly, he activated his Changpan aura, letting its gentle hum cloak his body in a protective shimmer. Then, steeling himself, he stepped forward until he stood right beside the Dragonite. "Hello," he offered quietly. For a heartbeat, the great dragon simply stared, dumbfounded. Then it blinked, as if unsure what to make of this human who dared approach so boldly. It didn't understand why, moments ago, its instinctive hatred toward this human had vanished. Why, instead, it now sensed kindness in his calm demeanor. The memory of its long imprisonment came rushing back, sharpening its fangs into a cruel grin meant to drive Owen away. Owen, though, remained unflinching. He drew in a steady breath, then knelt beside the giant Tyrannosaurus, placing a gentle hand on its broad belly. His eyes closed as he reached into the beast's mind, seeking the root of its fury. Suddenly, Owen was plunged into total darkness, an endless void. Then, bright overhead lamps flickered on, revealing a sterile laboratory. A man in a white coat stepped forward. Owen felt the dinosaur's panic and rage surge. The creature bared teeth and snapped claws against invisible restraints, desperate to tear free. But before it could break loose, a swirl of frost erupted around it, delicate ice crystals cascading over every scale. Owen sensed the bone-deep cold that numbed muscle and spirit alike. In that moment, he understood. The frost was the true prison, and fear its unrelenting jailer. With compassion in his heart, he pressed closer, determined to melt both ice and terror and win the Tyrannosaurus's trust once and for all. Owen felt it all in a single, searing moment. Blinding pain, ice-cold numbness, frostbite creeping through every limb until his body went soft and unresponsive. This was the instant when Dragonite's fury and will to survive had nearly torn through the alloy restraints that bound it. And then, in a heartbeat, a thick syringe plunged into its arm. A milky white serum flooded its veins, and every last ounce of strength drained away. Its mind remained painfully clear, but its body grew weaker by the second as the scientists methodically drew its blood. From that day on, the routine was unending. Injections that kept it perpetually debilitated, frigid chambers that left its scales coated in ice, and blood drawn every 3 days. For 6 brutal months, Dragonite endured freeze and bleed, cycle after cycle of agony, until, at last, Mewtwo stormed the facility and tore the base apart, finally giving the Pokémon a chance to flee. Owen sensed every echo of that torment, not as a distant memory, but as a fresh wound. Each recollection of powerlessness bit deeper, refusing to fade. "Damn," he muttered, unable to hold back the curse. If any creature had a right to rage, it was Dragonite. Owen stared at the Dragonite, whose hostility was as clear as ever. After 6 months of relentless buffs, their bond score had still plunged to -50. Owen suspected it was the lingering influence of the Evergreen's blessing that kept them at odds. Gently releasing Dragonite's claw, he tried again. "You must be feeling awful, right?" Dragonite's eyes flickered, just for a moment, then it whipped its head away in silent protest. Fine, no sparring partner, no audience. Owen shrugged, undeterred, and knelt down to look the dragon Pokémon in the eye. "Hey, Dragonite, are you hungry?" A short nod. Then, as if embarrassed, Dragonite glared back. "Yeah!" Owen offered a patient smile. "If you are, just eat something, okay?" He reached into his pack and produced a sealed pouch. Inside lay an SSS-tier Dragon Fire Fruit Energy Cube, its surface faintly perfumed with exotic spice. To any Dragon-type Pokémon, this cube wasn't just a potent energy booster, it would also dramatically accelerate their skill enhancements once they'd tasted it for the first time. Owen extended it slowly, sincere in his tone. "Trust me, this will help." Dragonite's hostile glare wavered. The promise of power, and maybe a small measure of trust, shone in its eyes. With a reluctant sigh, it reached forward to take the cube. The energy cubes could even heal old wounds, making them exactly what Tyrannosaurus needed right now. Yet the massive creature turned its head away and bared its teeth. It hadn't eaten since that island incident when it was electrocuted, but was Owen really expecting it to beg for a few energy cubes? Owen's voice hardened. He stepped closer and addressed Mewtwo without a hint of hesitation. "This isn't Tyrannosaurus's decision. Mewtwo, open its mouth." Mewtwo froze, startled by Owen's sudden authority. Owen repeated himself, every word firm. "Open it, now." With a soft hum of telekinetic power, Mewtwo pried open the dinosaur's jaws. Owen seized the chance. He thrust the first energy cube into Tyrannosaurus's maw, then another, and another, until almost all of them were gone. When only the last handful remained, Owen glanced at Mewtwo. "Help it chew and swallow." Mewtwo hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Guiding the cubes with gentle psychic force, he urged them down Tyrannosaurus's throat. The enormous beast closed its jaws and, after a few deep gulps, began to feel the healing energy coursing through its body. Its posture eased, and at last the tension melted from its eyes. Owen watched as Mewtwo's psychic grip forced the Tyrannosaurus to stand its ground. The giant dinosaur's eyes shone with irritation, but there was something else there too. Curiosity, even a hint of doubt. Every time Owen offered it an energy cube, the beast's lingering weakness seemed to fade. Could it be gearing up for Dragon Dance? If it tried, its strength might surge, but under our Mewtwo's control, it couldn't even attempt it. After nearly a dozen cubes, Owen tapped Mewtwo on the shoulder. "All right, that's enough. Let it go." With a ripple of psychic energy, Mewtwo withdrew its hold. The Tyrannosaurus wobbled for a moment, then steadied itself, glaring at Owen. Mewtwo floated back, arms crossed. "Your aim is to soften its view of humans?" Owen nodded. "Exactly. Breeding and building trust are my specialty." Mewtwo shook its head slightly. "It won't happen overnight. Judging by how defensive it still is, you're looking at 6 months at least. You can't thaw 3 feet of ice in a day." Owen met its gaze. "Then we'll be patient. If we can break that ice, the results will speak for themselves." Owen stood just outside the containment field, watching the restless Dragonite circle within. Mewtwo hovered beside him, its psychic aura flickering softly in the dim light. "If we don't do this right, it'll spend the rest of its life locked away," Owen said. He folded his arms, eyes never leaving the powerful Pokémon. Mewtwo's voice was calm but firm. "We must wait until its hostility fades. Release it too soon, and it will lash out again, or worse, be captured by someone less scrupulous." Owen nodded. "Agreed, and I can't just leave it in a Pokeball indefinitely. The longer it's confined, the more bitter it'll become. Over the next few days, I'll handle its care personally." For a moment, Owen had considered entrusting Dragonite to Gardevoir, but Gardevoir's gentle nature worried him. It might not have the strength to keep Dragonite's temper in check. Only Mewtwo had the power and composure to oversee the process. Mewtwo inclined its head. "Very well, I'll stand by to intervene if necessary." Just then, Slimy Melody, Owen's little slime-type companion, popped the last bit of its energy cube into its mouth. Finishing with a satisfied glorp, it bounced forward and looked first at Mewtwo, then at Owen, its large, bead-bright eyes softening. "Good boy," Owen cooed, kneeling to offer his hand. Slimy Melody didn't recoil. Instead, it pressed its cool, gelatinous form against his palm, shivering happily. Owen smiled, gently rubbing its belly. In that simple moment of trust and warmth, the weight of everything else, Dragonite's fate, the delicate balance they were trying to maintain, fell away. And for the first time since this all began, he allowed himself to believe things might just work out. Owen studied the young Slimy Melody thoughtfully. It was still a child, quick to take offense, but just as quick to forgive. He'd need to find it a proper home and have his housekeeper's sister keep an eye on it, helping it open up and gain confidence. The old cowshed might do nicely. If he piled up a few empty honey wine barrels, he could carve out a cozy little stall for the creature. As for Dragonite, Owen had decided it would simply spend the night in Mewtwo's Pokeball. Then he paused, realizing he'd overlooked one last detail. Turning to his psychic partner, he said, "Oh, one more thing, Mewtwo. The room you used to stay in? I've given it to Gardevoir. So as of now, you don't actually have anywhere to sleep." Mewtwo's eyes narrowed, the silence between them stretching uncomfortably. Owen grinned and held out a Pokeball. "No worries. Why don't you just spend the night in here, too?" Chapter 168, September 28. 3 contingents arrived in Wutong Town today. The largest was the road-building crew, over 100 workers who, having finished their survey yesterday, broke ground first thing this morning. They brought more than a dozen fighting-type Pokémon, and with eager local volunteers joining in, the workforce nearly reached 200. Owen also sent reinforcements of his own. Dragonite. He'd considered dispatching Mewtwo, but realized it would be awkward for Mewtwo to oversee roadwork while Dragonite handled the heavy lifting. Dragonite, Owen knew, was more than capable on its own. Road construction always begins by widening the path, digging trenches along both edges. For humans armed with shovels, it's slow, back-breaking work. For Dragonite, however, it was almost effortless. Owen watched as Dragonite launched into action. The massive Pokémon dropped into the freshly cut channel, planted its feet firmly, and raked its dragon-clawed hands through the earth. Each decisive stroke sent soil tumbling behind it, where the road crew's own Pokémon scooped it up and hauled it away. The pace was astonishing, already outstripping the mechanical excavator at the far end of the site. When the excavator's claws slammed into the boulder, the machine didn't laboriously haul the entire rock away. Instead, it shattered it into fragments in a single scoop. Owen watched in fascination as the massive stone crumbled into manageable pieces before being loaded onto the dump truck. Behind him, the lineup of fighting-type Pokémon stood agape. "Wait a minute," blurted one Machoke, rubbing its jaw. "Are you saying these are fighting-type Pokémon who do construction work?" Before another could answer, a bulkier figure, half bulldozer, half Pokémon, rumbled forward. "Second team," it announced in its deep, mechanical voice. "Huba Construction." Owen nodded, smiling. Over the past 2 days, he'd been in talks with these crews to overhaul his estate. His original plan had been modest, just a larger kitchen on the far side of the garden. But with 3 dragon-type Pokémon now under his care, and with Mewtwo's upcoming arrival, modest wasn't going to cut it. He needed a full-fledged living wing. More rooms, villa-style, with a covered walkway linking it to the training grounds and the main house. He glanced at the steaming trays of rubble being cleared away. Construction like this was expensive, and until recently, Owen's pockets had been nearly empty. He'd watched every copper coin, stretched every credit. But now that he had the resources, well, a man could indulge himself just a little, right? After all, he couldn't very well ask a legendary psychic type like Mewtwo to spend his days cooped up in a Pokeball. Not with space like this, waiting to be built. Owen lifted his cap against the dust. "All right," he said, turning to the Huba team. "Let's get started on that kitchen expansion, and then we'll break ground on the new villa wing. I want it ready before winter." The Pokémon nodded, flexing muscles and gears alike. This was more than construction. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Owen's sanctuary, and he couldn't wait to see it take shape. Now that Owen had some capital to spend, he saw no point in being overly frugal. After all, what's the point of earning money if you can't enjoy it? After laying out his needs, Captain Huba nodded enthusiastically and offered him a 2-story house of roughly 200 to 300 square meters. The building was broad in front and extended deep into the lot, where a bluestone path led straight from the backyard to Owen's orchards and gardens. Huba even promised that if Owen acquired the title deeds for the parcels flanking that path, he'd install a free fence all around to help expand the plantation. At the center of the adjoining land stood a small, long-abandoned bungalow. No one had lived there as long as Owen could remember. To grow his operation, he'd either have to tear down the old cottage or take over its property rights. A major project, but very tempting. With more Pokémon arriving every day, a steady stream of customers, and an expanding takeaway service, Owen's orchard was beginning to feel too small. The fruit harvested each morning barely met demand. Owen glanced at his watch as he packed up the last of the energy cubes. Lately, they'd been selling out by mid-afternoon, 3 or 4 o'clock at the latest, and with a handful of new dragon Pokémon joining the farm, it was high time to expand. He strode down to the mayor's office and asked to lease the adjacent fields. To his relief, the mayor agreed without hesitation. Gathering his courage, Owen added, "There's also that old bungalow by my place. Might I use that land too?" Mayor Hanyu raised an eyebrow. "You mean the little house next to your family's home?" Owen nodded eagerly. "Exactly. I heard your parents first settled in Wutong Town there. My understanding is your mother thought your father needed something to do, so he set up the plantation, and then you were born." Hanyu's expression turned from surprise to amusement. "How would I not know that? Of course you can have it. Just stop by my office when you've got a moment and sign the paperwork." With a dismissive wave, the mayor returned to his maps and plans for the town's major road expansion, literally the biggest civic project in years. Owen stood in the doorway for a beat, then quietly took his leave. Back at the plantation, he found Captain Huba pacing beside a row of restless dragon Pokémon. "Good news," Owen announced. "We've got the land. Let's break ground." After running the numbers one more time, Captain Huba nodded. "We'll need roughly 1.3 million yuan to do this properly." Owen squared his shoulders. "Then let's get started." Owen studied the contractor's estimate, roughly 200,000 yuan to repair the road. In his mind, that was mere pocket change, barely 2 days' worth of turnover for his breeding house. Money, after all, was like Squirtle eggs. Spend it now, and you'll breed more later. The only other visitor that afternoon, hardly a group, really, was Fang Yuji, who had shown up with a pair of Eevees. From the moment he arrived, his face was tight with confusion, especially when he spotted Owen. On the drive over, Fang Yuji couldn't shake what he'd seen. A Dragonite repairing the road. It made no sense. Dragonites and road work should be as incompatible as fire and water. Then there was the creature's claw, effortlessly smoothing cracked pavement in seconds, undeniable proof of top-tier strength. Unable to contain his curiosity, Fang Yuji had leapt from his vehicle and peppered the crew with questions, only to discover the Dragonite in question belonged to Owen's breeding house. The revelation left him more puzzled than ever. A nearby resident couldn't help but pipe up. "Owen is unbelievable. Every Pokémon he's caught seems stronger than the last. Sure, there's Dragonite, but he's got a bunch of other top-tier ones, too." Another nodded. That Dragonite's a digging machine, faster and deeper than any ground type we've seen around here. What else does he have? The first man tapped his chin. Let's see, they're two huge serpents. One's called Melodic, the other, well, I heard it as Kingdra or maybe Monarch, can't be sure. I'm no spring chicken after all. Oh, and Owen runs a video channel, something like Owen's Lil Bro? Or maybe Little Owen? Intrigued, Mr. Fang Yuzi went straight home and searched online. Almost at once, he stumbled upon the channel and started watching. Within minutes, he was even more stunned. Melodic and Kingdra, two colossal sea serpents, Dragonite, Primarina, Blaziken, Pidgeot, and just yesterday, he'd seen Owen's Gardevoir in action. He shook his head in disbelief. Just last Chinese New Year, Owen hadn't shown up with a single Pokémon. Now, in barely 6 months, he'd assembled this entire powerhouse team. It seemed impossible, yet the videos left no room for doubt. Owen looked up from the workbench just as Fang Yuji appeared at the breeding house door, eyes wide with astonishment. Every Pokémon you catch seems stronger to hand the last. Fang exclaimed. You've been traveling for years, nabbed over 10 different species before you even raised a champion-level Flareon, and now you're here running this breeding house full of rare, powerful Pokémon? Owen stepped aside with a friendly grin. Since you're here, come on in. Still half in disbelief, Fang Yuji shuffled across the threshold and took in the rows of incubating eggs. Owen folded his arms, curious. So did the Eevee arrive? What's the price? Fang blinked, then shook his head. It's not for sale. My dad said if you want to train it, he'd just give it to you. Owen flushed and waved a hand. You don't have to. I'm serious, Fang cut in. Last time I saw Aju, your Flareon, it clearly adores you. Dad thinks the Eevee will too. He hesitated, studying Owen's easy confidence. Owen, what kind of trainer are you really? Chapter 169. Fang Yuji studied Owen with a thoughtful expression. What trainer's credentials do you have? Owen blinked, caught off guard. After a moment's hesitation, he said, I'm only a novice trainer. In truth, he'd only taken the novice trainer exam. His ability to care for a whole roster of Pokémon came from breeder and breeding house licenses, not from any advanced trainer rank. Fang Yuji didn't buy it, but he knew Owen wouldn't lie about something so petty. He rephrased his question. No, Owen, I mean, how strong are your Pokémon? Owen drew a deep breath and shifted uncomfortably. They're quite capable, he admitted. He couldn't very well claim they'd sweep the Zongheng Conference, though he was confident they could. Even without Mewtwo, Gardevoir alone stood a good chance at first place. Fang Yuji fell silent. 2 pointed questions, yet only a vague reply. Sometimes the lack of an answer speaks louder than words. Taking in Owen's evasiveness, Fang Yuji let the subject rest. If Owen wouldn't boast, then his silence was proof enough of the power he quietly commanded. Owen glanced down at the 2 Pokeballs in his hand and allowed himself a small, confident smile. At least they're not weaker than me, he muttered. Carefully, he set them aside. Once he was back home, he'd pull up the videos his brother Feng had posted online and study those Pokemon's battles in detail. 2 Eevee, he mused, picturing their potential. That evening, after a long, hectic day, Owen finally stepped into his room. Frost Milk Fairy sat primly on his desk, its calm gaze welcoming him. On the carpet lay a coiled monarch snake, emerald scales glinting in the soft light, and on the bed, side by side, Ice Vulpix and a lone Eevee were curled up, quietly dozing. Just seeing them eased every bit of tension he'd carried. The morning had begun with the Alliance's road crews arriving to repair the stretch of damaged highway. At midday, Captain Huba's privately hired construction team showed up. Unlike the Alliance workers, these men and women relied on Owen to provide both lunch and afternoon tea. Sandwiched between those tasks, Owen met with the mayor to finalize the land deed for his plantation. Back home, he and Captain Huba pored over drawings and budgets, plotting out how best to expand the fields, a vital but time-consuming endeavor. Earlier in the afternoon, Owen had even toured the old bungalow the mayor had mentioned as a possible storage site. Now, surrounded by his Pokémon and free of appointments, Owen at last felt a wave of relief settle over him. Tomorrow, he'd dive into those videos, but tonight he could simply rest. Owen lifted the lid and found it empty. Shrugging, he stepped back and let Captain Huba take point. Between watching the Tyrannosaurus's every move and coordinating with the crew, He felt as if he'd accomplished nothing all day, even though the hours had flown by. By the time the two Eevee arrived, Owen only had time for a cursory glance before handing them off to Stewardess Ajiu. Fortunately, this whirlwind of activity would last only 2 more days. After that, things would settle down. That evening, Owen slipped into his cabin, exhausted but relieved that his shift was almost over. The moment he stepped inside, Ju's face broke into a grin. "Booyee! Booyee!" the little trainer exclaimed, patting the small mattress beside him. "Booyee! Meet Owen, our new trainer. He's very good to me." The two Eevee perched on the mattress blinked up at Owen, their ears twitching. "Booyee?" they repeated shyly. Urged on by Ju's encouragement, they exchanged a glance and padded forward, tails wagging tentatively. It was only the second time these Eevee had seen Owen. Their first introduction had been at dinner. A grand table piled with delicacies, ringed by a dozen Pokémon, some radiating strength, others exuding nobility. Despite their imposing presence, every single one had greeted the Eevee with gentle kindness. Now, as the siblings approached their new trainer, Owen bent down and offered them a warm smile. There," he said softly, extending a hand. "I'm Owen. I've been looking forward to meeting you." The Eevee sniffed his fingers, then nudged his palm, accepting his gentle touch. Ju burst into applause. "See? They like you already." Owen laughed. "Looks like it." And just like that, the last traces of the day's exhaustion melted away, replaced by the promise of new friendships and new adventures on the days ahead. Owen slipped into the breeding house just long enough to wolf down his meal before dashing off again, though the food here was undeniably good. The two young Eevees, watching him for only the second time, immediately noticed something different this visit. Owen was smiling. They remembered the house manager's advice. You can tell if a human is kind by the look on their face when they see you. A genuine smile means they like you. At the sight of Owen's warm expression, both pups relaxed. Owen approached them slowly, crouching to their level. He offered a gentle hand and in a soft voice said, "I'm sorry I was so busy this afternoon. I didn't get to greet you properly. That was my mistake." The larger Eevee tilted its head, ears pricked in curiosity. "Apologizing?" it prompted quietly. "Apologizing," Owen confirmed with a nod and a reassuring smile. Encouraged, the braver Eevee inched forward, its tail wagging as it stared up at him. The smaller one followed suit, stepping closer with cautious excitement. Both accepted Owen's apology, and, more importantly, his friendship. Owen held out his right hand, and one of the Ibrahimovic, its claws sheathed in soft fur, gently placed its paw in his palm. "Bye," it murmured in its sing-song voice. At the same moment, the other Ibrahimovic flipped onto its back, exposing its plush white belly. It was a gesture they'd all learned back at the Ibrahimovic cultivation house, a tried-and-true way to win over a trainer's affection. Some trainers like to bury their faces in that downy fluff. Others preferred a hearty handshake or a gentle belly rub. By offering both their paw and their underbellies, the two Ibrahimovic were making it unmistakably clear they accepted Owen as their trainer. Or perhaps, Owen thought, they were simply excited. They knew they'd soon be traveling with him and Ju, and even though most Ibrahimovic stick with a single trainer for life, these two didn't seem the least bit anxious about forging a new partnership. Instead, they looked forward to it with eager, trusting eyes. Owen couldn't help but smile. There was something incredibly soothing about those soft, furry creatures. No matter how tense he'd felt during the journey here, seeing their gentle faces and trusting postures melted every last bit of his worry away. "All right then," he whispered, giving each of them a reassuring pat. "Let's go meet the rest of the team." With that, the trio, trainer and two Ibrahimovic, set off down the corridor, their steps light and full of promise. Owen couldn't resist scooping up one Eevee in each arm, gently stroking their velvety cheeks, one on his left, the other on his right. At first, they stiffened in surprise, but almost immediately they relaxed, nuzzling him back with soft purrs. Just as Owen reached to check their trainer data, he felt a tug at his trouser leg. Looking down, he found his Ice Vulpix staring up at him. She'd been watching Owen fawn over the new Eevees the entire time, and he hadn't said a single word to her. Her pale blue eyes brimmed with silent reproach. Owen laughed. All right, he said, setting the two Eevees gently on the bed. Then he scooped up Ice Vulpix in his arms. You're such a jealous little one. Of course, little referred only to her age. At nearly 0.8 meters tall, Ice Vulpix was easily the largest of the trio, almost a full circle larger than 3 normal Eevees combined. Thankfully, the bed was wide enough for them all. Just then, Ice Vulpix planted her frosty paws on Owen's forearms, her claws lightly scratching as if to say, "About time you paid attention to me." It didn't understand what the jealous one was muttering, but it could tell the words weren't kind, so it stuck out its tongue in a pout. A moment later, Aju glanced down at the 2 Eevees playing below, his eyes shining with pride. Right, he chattered eagerly. Owen is the best trainer ever. Chapter 170. Owen finished his shower and slipped under the covers. At the foot of the bed, Ice the Vulpix and Aju the Eevee were glued to the glowing screen of the small TV, watching their favorite anime. 2 more Eevees, noticing Owen's return, shuffled aside and offered their seats, tails wagging uncertainly. On screen, a diminutive Pikachu wore a mask and cape, defending Pikachu Town from a shadowy evil organization. Underneath the disguise lay the town's greatest hero, ready to spring into action. Though the storyline might sound dated on Earth, in this world, where entertainment revolves around Pokémon battles and grand performance contests, it felt fresh and thrilling. Ice Vulpix and Aju had been absorbed by the show for days. Ice especially, the little fox would leap up at the climactic moment, raise its front paws, and let out a determined "Pika! Pika!" as if it were channeling its own thunderbolt attack. Then it would spit out frosty ice crystals, proudly showcasing its powers. Watching it mimic that heroic pose never failed to make Owen laugh. Settling in, Owen smiled at his Pokémon friends. No matter how simple the story, it was moments like these, shared laughter and cozy evenings, that made him feel at home. With Ice's frosty breath fogging the air and Aju curled against his side, he reached over and pressed play on the remote. The next episode was about to begin. He never makes those gestures in public, only in his room at night when he's asleep. Maybe he's afraid of being discovered, a little shy? Owen doesn't mind. It's harmless enough. Someday, he thinks, he might even have Mewtwo show Melodrama how it's done, once Melodrama feels ready. Owen's noticed that Melodrama is still painfully withdrawn. More timid might be the word. He refuses to approach people or Pokémon. Take tonight's dinner, for example. Owen asked Mewtwo to bring him and Melodrama out to the garden. The moment they stepped outside, Melodrama cowered behind Mewtwo and wouldn't so much as nod to the others. He only ate if Mewtwo stayed right by his side. Owen had briefly considered housing Melodrama in the cowshed, but Mewtwo couldn't tolerate the cramped quarters, and at night he'd simply wander off to find a quiet nook. This whole situation has left the housekeeper's sister feeling down. She'd arrived brimming with confidence. Her greatest talent, she claimed, was caring for infants, but now that baby is here, she feels she's let him down. In the end, everyone is doing their best to help Melodrama come out of his shell. Owen finished comforting Smello and turned to the smaller Pokémon, the one they'd come to call the Caretaker. Gently, he said, "Don't let one setback stop you. Treat it as a challenge, and you'll grow stronger for it." His words must have struck a chord, because the little Caretaker lifted her head, her eyes brightening with renewed determination. In truth, she wasn't so different from Smello. Both were young, both still uncertain of themselves. A stumble or two was only natural. What mattered was picking yourself back up. With the 2 of them settled, Owen's thoughts drifted to today's other assignment. Dragonite. Earlier that morning, he'd asked Mewtwo to escort it high above the repair crews working on the main thoroughfare. Up there in the quiet sky, Dragonite could calm his nerves and wander freely within set boundaries. When it was time for lunch, Owen brought Dragonite down to the garden, but still, the great Drake refused to eat. Seeing no other choice, Owen told Mewtwo to take a firmer approach and insist that Dragonite eat. It wasn't pleasant, but sometimes Pokémon needed a firm hand before they could relax. After a few tense moments, and after Owen quietly reminded Dragonite of all it had accomplished, his resistance finally softened. Step by step, Owen could feel the bond between them deepening. Tonight, he thought, Dragonite would eat, and tomorrow they'd be stronger for it. Owen frowned as he replayed the advice in his mind. Think about it. Your heart's already full of hate for humans. What good does all that anger do you? Nobody's going to compensate you for it. If you stay angry all the time, how can you ever move on? Focus on eating well and keeping your body strong. That's what really matters. Take this, billions of volts. The shout jolted Owen back to reality. He'd been lost in thought about how to keep a Tyrannosaurus as a companion when suddenly Ice Vulpix's voice rang out. Looking down, Owen realized the source of the commotion. His phone was streaming a battle between two Pikachus. The evil Pikachu, seething with rage, had just unleashed a massive electric barrage on its heroic counterpart. Around him, every Pokémon in the clearing cheered. Even the two Eevees who just arrived were bouncing on their paws, eyes shining. Ice Vulpix struck a dramatic pose, ears flattened, tail raised, and fixed Owen with a mischievous glare, as if he himself were the villainous Pikachu from the screen. With a flourish, Vulpix pointed at Owen. Quick as a flash, Owen dropped to one knee and let out a dramatic cry. "Ouch! You got me, but mark my words, I'll be back!" Ice Vulpix threw back his head and let out a triumphant chuckle. "He crowed. Gotcha! Ha-ha!" Clearly reveling in his victory. The Royal Serpent cast a patient glance at Ice Vulpix and Owen. Checking the time once more, she coiled her tail around Owen's wrist and gave a gentle tug. "Bedtime," she hissed softly. Owen sighed, holding up his tablet before Ice Vulpix could tap next episode. "All right, that's enough. Lights out." Though Ice Vulpix pouted, it obediently padded over to its usual spot on the right side of the pillow and curled up, eyelids drooping. Owen turned to the three Eevees arranged at the foot of the bed. He circled them, then paused in front of the smallest. "You're Aju, right? Then the others must be Asan and Awu?" The largest Eevee sat up proudly. "I'm Asan, the eldest. Awu's the middle one, and Aju's our baby." Owen nodded, studying their sizes. Sure enough, the biggest was Asan, the next largest was Awu, and the tiniest was Aju. Satisfied, he settled back against his pillow, ready to drift off alongside his friends. Owen gently gathered the Eevees one by one and settled them on the left side of his pillow. "All right, everyone, time to sleep," he murmured, fluffing the blanket over them. The following days passed with an unexpected calm. The clamor of roadwork and house construction echoed all around, but inside the breeding center, traffic had slowed to a trickle. Instead, express deliveries poured in, and the Pidgeots flapped tirelessly between courier points. Owen found the quieter pace surprisingly comforting. Each morning, he strolled out to watch Dragonite at work, its massive claws smoothing fresh asphalt, its wings folding out to shield the crew from dust and debris. In the afternoons, he'd stand close to the great dragon, channeling Changpan's soothing aura to keep its normally fiery temperament in check, while nearby workers hammered and drilled. Under the steady rumble of machinery, days slipped by in peaceful routine. Yet as he watched the effort of construction and the harmony between Pokémon and humans, Owen felt that familiar spark of curiosity stirring once more.